Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into some of the scariest stories from Reddit that will absolutely not let you sleep tonight. These tales are disturbing, unsettling, and guaranteed to make you check your surroundings. So grab a blanket, turn on all the lights, and let's get into these terrifying true stories. Story 1. If your phone loses services and your GPS reroutes you, turn it off. Don't get me wrong, I love using GPS. Saves me time when there's traffic or unexpected construction. But it can be dangerous if it takes you to the wrong place at the wrong time. A shortcut through a bad part of the city at night, or a shortcut along a gravel road where your tyre gets punctured and suddenly you're there for hours waiting for a tow. Or worse, there are places we aren't meant to go. Last night, my fiancée Rav and I were on a road trip to visit family. Our trip took us through northern Appalachia, and our phone service kept cutting in and out. When we hit construction, our pace slowed to a crawl. The GPS offered a faster route, so we took it, but soon we were winding through wooded hills and lost all service. My map was still active, sort of, but no longer giving directions. It just showed the route we were on as a coloured line. The sun was lowering in the sky and I couldn't zoom out to see where we were. We also hadn't seen signs for any gas stations where I could ask for directions. "This," grumbled Rav, "this is why you shouldn't rely on GPS, Ricardo." He only ever called me Ricardo when he was upset, a habit he borrowed from my mum. I was always Rick until I was in trouble. He also was never willing to be the one to drive, and I said, "Okay, well, if you want to fill my car with maps from Minnesota to Long Island, I guess we could kill some trees and go the old-fashioned route. We can just map out the route in advance and print the sections we need." "Oh, so like MapQuest, back to the technological superiority of the 90s, I snarked. While we bickered, suddenly the phone screen went out and then flickered back on. The GPS was working again. Hallelujah! I thanked the universe as it began recalculating our route, and my spirits lightened even as the sky was getting darker. Rav never lets things go, though, and was still grumbling about how I shouldn't rely on my phone, about how I should look with my own eyes and learn the roads. If you depend on GPS, you stop learning to keep track of directions. You stop noticing things like that. He suddenly sat up. Haven't we already passed these signs? I hadn't been paying enough attention to notice and only barely caught a glimpse of a sign for falling rocks, followed up with another sign for bears. "I swear we drove by here a half hour ago," mumbled Rav. "Maybe we did," I said. "We were lost before. Now it's got the route, which is this way. But it's taking us further and further into the hills and away from the highway." I zoomed out and looked at the larger map. Maybe this is a shortcut to get further along ahead of the traffic. Rav fell quiet and we put on some music. Beneath the stereo, something didn't feel quite right. It was hard for me to pinpoint. On the surface, everything was fine, and I figured maybe my uneasy feeling was because this was an unfamiliar route, and we were both crabby and tired. We'd been in the car all day. I sped up as the sun vanished behind the hills, and the sky turned fiery red. I'd fallen into the zone like I always tend to do while driving long distances. When the roads are long empty stretches and I don't need to concentrate like in city traffic, I sort of just let instinct take over and my mind wanders. I just drove, just lazily watching my GPS and the line on the GPS marking the road. The road ran on endlessly ahead. I saw on the map where it curved. Up ahead, the road began to turn. "Hey Rick, hey, slow down!" At Rav's shout, I slammed the brakes, swerving because the curve came on faster than I expected. I looked at the GPS and it was zoomed in, and when I zoomed out, it showed how tight the curve was. There'd been some lag. Rav was clinging to the handle above the door. He glared my way, and I muttered an apology and drove more carefully. I am usually a pretty reliable driver. The GPS being laggy had caught me off guard. Rav glowered and said, "That thing is going to get us killed." More long stretches of silence, and the sky deepening as the first stars became visible. There was still a fair bit of light, but even so, I turned on my headlights. I was still following the long line of the GPS when suddenly Rav was screaming, "Stop! Stop!" I hadn't seen anything in the road, but his panic sent my foot shooting to the brake, and we skidded, and I yanked the wheel to bring us into the side of the hill. He was gasping, and I looked ahead to where the road went over a bridge. It took me a moment to see clearly what Rav had seen. A few feet out, the bridge was broken, nothing but the drop below. Rav and I got out and walked over to the bridge and stepped across remnants of a barricade. It must have been set up to warn vehicles about the bridge being out, but now it was in pieces, flattened and broken. Driving at speed, you'd never see these shattered pieces in time. Rav's eagle eyes had saved our lives. We stepped past the broken barricade. "Careful," muttered Rav as I moved to the edge of the bridge and looked down. Cars lay piled below, and what looked like a body spilled out of one of them at the bottom of the ravine. That's why the barricade was broken. Not just one, but multiple vehicles had smashed through it. Chilled, I backed away from the drop. The pair of us picked our way back over the shattered barricade and along the road. We were almost at our vehicle when headlights blinded us. A truck barreled toward us. I grabbed Rav and flung him with me into the hillside as the scream of a horn shot past us, the truck driver laying it on, and then the wheels clacked over the broken barricade and the horn faded out into nothingness as the truck went over. There was a horrible metallic crunching as it crashed and rolled far below. My head was bleeding from hitting a rock as we slammed into the hill, but luckily neither of us was seriously injured. We hurried into the car, strapping ourselves in and quickly pulling a 3-point turn and driving away. Back the way we'd come, ignoring the GPS now, ignoring its directions to turn around, recalculating route. Finally, we caught a glimpse of a sign for gas and followed until we reached the station, where we called police to report the broken bridge. While I was on the call using the gas station phone, my cell phone rebooted. Suddenly, it had signal again. And now, the map was showing me a totally different route, a totally normal route taking us back to the highway. Police never found the broken bridge, and my GPS never tried to take me that way again. But these days, just in case, I always plan my route in advance. That first story is just a taste of the terror to come. Let's move on to our next chilling tale. Story 2. I was a Catholic priest, and one disturbing confession haunts me to this day. Before you say it, there's no risk of excommunication for breaking the sacramental seal. I left the church of my own volition in 2013, so I will gladly reveal this unholy confession to you. Besides, I answer first to God, and this sinner was no child of him. The greatest fright of my life began 12 years ago when an unassuming note was delivered to the rectory. Tonight, 7 p.m. Wait in your confessional. Do not come out. Do not look at me. In retrospect, something was very off about that. But this wasn't the first time a guilty soul had concealed his or her identity before confessing. Usually, however, penitents would perhaps don a shawl or tinted glasses. This was new. He must be unbelievably riddled with shame, I decided, though I did not judge. After all, I still innocently believed I'd heard every crime before: adultery, abuse, and even murder, from a convict who had already served his time but sought to repent. So I granted him that. I have granted absolution to the greatest of sinners, but not this man. At 7 o'clock I sat and waited in my confessional, a shambly wooden booth with a rotting lattice divider, affording no pretence of discretion or separation between the priest and penitent during the sacrament of penance. Donations from my fellow Irishmen and Irishwomen had kept the lights on, but the church was falling into disrepair. Nevertheless, red drapes shielded the booth doorways. As I listened to the mystery note deliverer stride up the aisle, I hoped he would be appreciative for those curtains veiling his approach from my gaze. Wait in your confessional. Do not come out. Do not look at me. I was respecting his wishes, was not questioning them nearly as much as would have been apposite. The man opened his curtain, and I kept my eyes down. I glimpsed only the outline of a figure in the light of the church before he drew shut the red fabric behind him. Darkness returned. Not that the candles had provided much illumination anyway, and night had fallen beyond the stained glass windows. "Good evening, father," said the man. "Good evening, my child," I replied. "Are you looking away?" "Yes, my child. What brings you here today?" "Bless me, father, for I have sinned. This is my first confession." If I'd been a cynical man back then, I would have paid greater attention to the derision and lack of sincerity in his voice. "If you feel able, confess," the man exhaled deeply. "I have hurt those who have sinned, father, and that is my sin." There followed a pause, so I pressed. "Are you comfortable to tell me more?" "I am very comfortable, father." "Are you?" Now there was more than derision in his voice. There was a bladed edge which left my arms tingling and brought about my first twinge of fear. "Do not worry about me, my child," I said. "I am here not to judge, but to absolve you. Please, if you feel able, continue." "Oh, that's so grand of you, father." There was the sardonic tone again. "Well, you see, my sin is that I'm not like you, holy man. I don't seek sinners to absolve them, and I don't hurt them as some sort of retributive justice. No, I'm a taker, father. I eat shame. Heavens, does it taste good? Don't you think so?" He was clearly an unwell man, but not the first to have entered my booth. I think you have done the right thing by coming here today. I would like to pray for you." "Oh my God, help your child." "I'm not his child," said the man coldly. There it was again, that extra earthly blade slashing my arms. Only this time it felt like more than a psychological phenomenon. I examined my skin frantically, but found no marks, found no knife working through me. None of this was right. For the first time in my life, I did not feel God's presence in that church. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit," I eventually continued, voice fragile as I wrestled with the wrongness of the man on the other side of my booth. "With God's grace, I pray you find penance, absolution, and a life without sin. Amen. But I don't want absolution, Father. I'm confessing for the crake of it, don't you know? Most of all, I don't want to stop hurting sinners like you." That unseen knife tore into me again, and I looked down a second time. That twinge of fear blossomed into terror, the likes of which I have never felt before. Terror so paralyzing that I managed not even a whimper. The blade was not imaginary. A growing pool of blood stained the inner sleeves of my black cassock, and I rolled them up to reveal gashes running the length of my forearms, gashes still being cut by that spectral weaponry. I had long believed in miracles, but this was an abomination. The man cried out with laughter. "Oh, absolution! I feel it in me bones. Grand, so it is. Thanks be to God. Here, what about you, father? Have you confessed?" That question cut nearly as sharp at the blade, and I ignored it, clawing at my bleeding arms as fresh wounds were forged by that invisible blade. I fell to my knees and considered lifting my head to look up at the lattices. Considered looking at the... "I wouldn't be doing that if I were you, father," warned the man, blessed or cursed with psychic perception. "What are you? The devil?" "No devil here, father. No God. Nothing and no one to absolve you. I told you. That's not what I do." "Then what do you do?" "I eat shame," he growled. "Now confess, or I shall make things so much more terrible for you." Lifting my bloody hands to cover my eyes, I gave the man what he wanted. "Bless me, oh my God, for I have sinned," I began. I was 8 years old. Rihanna was my first love, but she liked Finley, not me. I knew as much when he broke his arm, and she drew a love heart on his plaster cast. I was envious, so I spread a rumour that Rihanna had kissed Finley behind the bicycle shed. Gossip was a dangerous thing in my small village. She and her family had to move away because folks started treating them cruelly. They called her the worst things. "Little Hure," the man said, and Finley was the Hure fucker. How do you know that? This penitent wasn't some former classmate of mine. I knew that from the wounds supernaturally inflicted on my arms. I whispered, "Who are you? Ask me that once more, father, and I'll pull back that red curtain to show you. But you won't like that. Trust me, it's for your sake. Finish the story." I blubbered. I always blamed Connor and Shion for what came next. They said Finley needed to be put in his place for taking your girl. Not that she'd ever been mine. Connor told Finley it was a shame his arm had healed because injuries win the girls. So my two friends took their penknives and started cutting into both his arms, cutting and cutting and cutting whilst he begged for them to stop. "And what did you do, Father?" I was becoming too light-headed to speak or even cry. I absolved myself of blame. I wasn't holding the knife after all, but I still let them do what they did, and maybe even enjoyed it, because I hated Finley. That's my greatest sin. At long last, the gashing of my flesh ceased. I would have leapt for joy, but I was too weak, too close to losing consciousness. "Despite all that, I think I'm going to die anyway," I lamented. The man laughed. "Your sin and guilt drove you to become a holy man, didn't it? Look at you, Father, a sinner, cleansing sinners. We are all sinners." "I absolve thee, sinner," the man mocked. "I'll be leaving now. Blessed be you, Father, for tonight's meal. Your guilt, your delectable disgrace, it was divine. Now, I pray you tend to your wounds quickly, should the Lord see fit." I heard his curtain draw back as I lay in a fetal position, eyeing the bottom of my own red curtain. A slither of light was visible at one side, cut off momentarily by a shade cast from the figure exiting the booth. I was tempted once more to peek. "No," the man advised. "Farewell." As he walked away, all seemed safe. I fumbled for the phone in my trouser pocket, below the cassock, to call an ambulance. But there was one final statement, one final terror. "Until we meet again, Father." If that story sent chills down your spine, brace yourself. Our next tale takes a turn into psychological terror that will make you question every warning your car gives you. Story 3. Warning. Check your back seat. Warning. Check your back seat. I wasn't worried about the message when it first popped up. It's one of those things they put in these days to make sure no one leaves a child in a hot car, I guess. It hadn't ever shown me that warning before, but I figured maybe a passenger had left a purse on the floor or something, and it was detecting the weight. There wasn't anything there, though. I looked under the seats and everything, even ran my hands along the back edge to see if there was a wallet or phone stuck in the crack. I didn't think that sort of thing would set off the alarm, but the car was still fairly new, so I couldn't be sure. Regardless, nothing was there. I'd forgotten about it by the end of the next day, honestly. But when I pulled into my driveway and turned off the car, there it was again on my dashboard. I checked the back seat again. Still nothing. I hadn't had any messages from passengers looking for any lost items either. Maybe this was just a thing the car did? Just a general warning to remind drivers to check the back seat every time they got out. If so, it felt counterproductive. If the warning was there every time, people were bound to start ignoring it. It would just become part of the background. Also, I was sure that the car hadn't been doing this for the first several months I'd had it. On the other hand, this was the sort of change they might have pushed through a software update. There could have been some new legislation, some lobbying group pushing to have this warning on, permanently, like the meaningless parental advisory stickers on music. I looked online that night, searching through car forums and news posts for any mention of this warning. I couldn't find any indication that it was supposed to be happening every time I turned the car off. In fact, it didn't seem to be showing up for anyone else. This problem was only in my car. Clearly, it was just a bad sensor. It was probably still under warranty, but in order to get it fixed, I'd still have to leave it at the dealership for a day, and the warranty wasn't going to pay my lost income for the day off. I told myself I could just ignore it. It was just a single line of text. I'd stop noticing it in no time. I was wrong. Every time I turned the car off, that message glared at me like a dire omen. I found myself obsessively checking the back seat every time I got out, even though I knew I'd find nothing. I vacuumed the car until not so much as a crumb remained. I checked the seatbelt latches. Everything was perfect, but the warning still appeared. I tried ignoring it. I averted my eyes when I turned the car off, but I could feel it glowing from the deactivated dash. See the phantom words printed across the darkness of my eyelids. I walked away from the car without looking in the back, telling myself that it was a waste of time and there was nothing to find. I knew I was right, of course, but I found myself wide awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling and thinking, what if? I ended up kneeling in the street, in my pajamas, with my phone flashlight on, looking under the seats for something I knew wouldn't be there. The back seat was as empty as always. The warning haunted me constantly. I only saw it when I stopped the car, but I knew it was always coming. I began to watch the back seat constantly, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror more than was safe or reasonable. My passengers noticed. My rating began to dip, with notes marking concerns about attentiveness to the road. My tips suffered as well. Finally, I bit the bullet and took the car in to get the sensor fixed. The warning mocked me as I parked it in the lot, daring me to go inside without looking. I wanted to. I knew there was nothing there. But if I claimed there was a sensor issue, and they found a bag or a box or some other physical object sitting back there, I'd look like I was too dumb to have just checked the back seat. I knew I had checked it. I had checked it 1,000 times. But I looked once more just to be sure. I explained my problem to the man at the counter. He typed some notes into his computer and said, "Gonna be a few hours until we can get you in." "That's fine," I said. "I'll wait." "You sure you don't have?" he began. I cut him off more emphatically than I intended. "There is nothing in the back seat. I have looked." All right, he said, raising his hands to placate me. "Just trying to save you some time in case." I went to look again after that. I really couldn't have stood being wrong at that point. It was empty. It was always empty. I knew every crevice of that back seat now. There was nothing there. I sat in the waiting room drinking coffee and playing on my phone. I was inexplicably nervous. I couldn't figure out why. It was just a sensor issue. They would find it and fix it. The problem would go away. It was crazy that I'd waited this long, that I'd let it get to me this much. Finally, they called me back up to the front. "Well, we can't find anything wrong with your car," the mechanic said. "What do you mean?" "There's absolutely nothing in the back seat. I have made very sure of that." "Back seat's clean as a whistle, sure, but we can't get that warning to turn on either. Not without someone in the back seat. It cuts on like it's supposed to with a person back there, but if it's just the driver, it doesn't show." My expression must have been somewhere between disbelief and rage. The mechanic took a step back. "Look, I'll come show you." I calmed myself and followed him out to the garage. He turned on the car while I watched through the window. He let it run for a moment, then turned it off. No message appeared. "See," he said, "we can replace the part if you want, but since we can't find an issue, it's not going to be covered under warranty. And we've got to take the entire back seat out to do it. So there's going to be a decent labour fee." I ignored him and got into the car. I turned it on and then, with trepidation, turned it back off. For the first time in weeks, no warning appeared. The rush of relief I felt was incredible. I turned the car on and off again several more times. There was no message. The warning was gone. "You happy?" the mechanic asked. "Unbelievably," I said. He shrugged. "Wish they were all this easy." I drove home feeling like I was floating. I hadn't realised how much tension I had been carrying, or how much my car had begun to feel like a prison. The road was broad and open. The day was beautiful. I was free. In my peripheral vision, a light flickered. Something on the passenger side of the car had blinked out. A little orange light I could not remember ever having paid attention to before. I stared sharply at it now, trying to figure out what had been illuminated. It blinked briefly again, on just long enough for me to read it. Passenger airbag off. It stayed on whenever there was no one in the front passenger seat. It was off now. The final short blink could have been anything. It could have been an LED failing, a sensor breaking, any of 1,000 electrical glitches, or it could have been something settling itself into the passenger seat. I pulled over to the side of the road. I left the car running when I got out. I did not look back as I walked away. There was no point. I knew there was nothing in the back seat anymore. I never went back for the car. The police called a few days later. They'd found my vehicle, they said. Some kids had taken it out joyriding. It was in bad shape. So were the kids. They were reviewing the dashcam footage, but did I want a copy for my insurance? I shouldn't have watched it. I knew that before I ever put the thumb drive in my computer. But I had to know. They were laughing at first, whooping and hollering as they sped away down the street, all clearly having fun at first. Pretty soon, though, one of them starts cautioning the driver to slow down. The panic starts then, screaming that the pedals won't work, the wheel won't turn, the doors won't open. All the while, the speed on the display is creeping higher and higher. It ends as you'd expect. I'm sure there'll be questions about why I left my car with the keys in it, whether I knew something was wrong. I suppose the clean bill of health I got from the dealership that day will be useful in proving my innocence. I'm not worried about that right now, though. My Ring doorbell is notifying me that there's someone on my front porch, but the camera shows nothing at all. That twist ending has us all on edge, but we're not done yet. Our final story tonight is the longest and most disturbing of them all. Get ready for a tale of hidden horrors and family terror. Story 4. There's something seriously wrong with my family's new home. I knew something was off the moment I saw the place. It turned out to be worse than I could have possibly imagined. I first laid eyes on the house after my parents had closed the deal. We'd been driving through a fancy neighbourhood that our rusty Honda CR-V felt out of place in. After a final turn, the house appeared at the end of a lane, far enough away from the other homes to feel somehow separate from the rest of the community. It was tall and old, yet well kept, earning a vintage boldness that I appreciated. Nestled into an evergreen wood, it seemed like the last bit of civilization before a wilderness that stretched ever on. "That is our new house," I gasped, leaning forward to poke my head between the front seats. Taken by the majesty of it, I paid little mind to the locals who stared at us as we passed. My dad chuckled heartily. "It is, Ari." "How? I was only 17, but old enough to know that we couldn't have afforded such a place." "It was a steal," my mum chirped, glancing at my father. "We got so lucky. It's been how long, dear, that we've been house hunting?" 2 years, my dad sighed. "Well, patience does pay off," and my mum went on, gesturing at the house. "Wait long enough and search hard enough, and you might just strike gold." "Smelly gold, that is," added my dad, with another chortle. I nodded absently, gawping at the building. I didn't need any better explanation. I was in no position to complain. That monument at the end of the lane was to be my new home. "I want my own room," exclaimed my younger sister, Lena. My younger brother, Kai, pouted a little at that. She was 8 and he was 4. They'd been sharing a room since Kai was old enough to be away from our parents. "You'll have just that, honey," answered my mum. Lena squealed in excitement, grinning ear to ear. She couldn't have known that she'd soon come to regret this, and never wish to sleep alone again in her life. Things were fine for the first few days, as you'd expect. The interior of the house was as old and proud as its exterior, and twice as spacious as our former place. It was smelly, though, as my dad had mentioned. The sour reek that seemed to permeate the place was the main reason we got such a discount, my mom explained. Our dogs, Chiefy and Miss Bear, loved it, even with their extra sensitive noses. They were running up and down the halls barking all day long, unbothered by the stink. They left plenty of dirt on the floors, drawing complaints from my parents. It was unsettling when the dogs growled at the house come night-time, but that was easily explained as the old building moaned and creaked plenty when the winds off the wilderness pushed against it. The doggos would need a week to adjust. That was all. The first thing that really rubbed me the wrong way was Kai talking to himself in his room. My brother and sister were in the bedrooms on either side of my own, and it was easy enough to hear them through the old woodwork. Lena was singing along to the K-pop Demon Hunters soundtrack on one side. That was nothing new. But on the other side, my typically quiet little brother was mumbling, and I couldn't hear anyone else with him. I didn't think much of it at first, but this behaviour continued, and he'd even be talking to himself around the house. My mum was the one to confront him about it. "Kai, sweetie, what are you saying? Are you talking to yourself?" Kai looked up at her, confused. "No, Mummy, I'm talking to my friend." Ooh, creepy, I thought, smirking a little. My mother shot a strange glance at my dad, one that meant more than I could have known, then turned back to Kai. "Who's your friend, Kai?" He shrugged, eyes fixed on the toy blocks he was stacking on the carpet. "I don't know." My parents whispered to one another for a while after this, deliberating, and seemed to ultimately decide that it was okay for a boy of 4 to have an imaginary friend. Fair enough, I supposed, and we carried on. A week passed, then two, and still the dogs would not settle when it came to the house's creaking. They would growl and even bark far too often throughout the night. What really got to me was the time Miss Bear was sleeping at the foot of my bed and started growling, seemingly at nothing. I couldn't hear any creaking. It wasn't a windy night, but she was growling at the wall of my room, the one shared with Kai. Enough, I hissed. Miss Bear looked at me for a moment, then back at the wall and let out a sharp bark. I opened my mouth to protest, but abruptly she yelped, backing away, tail between her legs. Her sudden fear shot my own feeling of, you creepy, right up to, oh fuck, oh god, oh hell no. What is it, girl? I whispered. Miss Bear's hackles were raised, her tail still between her legs. She maintained a low growl. Then all at once she shot out of my room, veering toward Kai's door. I jumped out of bed and followed her into my brother's room. Kai was awake. He was sitting on his bed, facing our shared wall. It's okay, he said to our dog. It was just my friend. I looked from Kai to the dogs. Chiefy had come as well to see what the fuss was about, then threw my hands up and left. It was okay for a boy of 4 to have an imaginary friend. Right? The next day, on a whim, I took a closer look at the wall my brother and I shared. I swung the curtains open to let in the daylight, then ran my hand over the wooden planks and the ivory paint that covered them. I couldn't sense anything off. There were a couple paintings hanging on the wall, a dresser pushed up against it, and an air intake vent at its base. Unsatisfied, I decided to lay my shoulder into the dresser and push it away from the wall. The cool draft from the air vent caused goosebumps to break out on my leg as I peered behind the dresser. It was subtle, but at the bottom of the wall, just above the baseboards, there was a stain. It was old and brown, but might have once been red. The stain ran down the wall in rivulets, as if a thick liquid had splattered there and dribbled down. Scrunching my nose in disgust, I took a quick sniff. The same sourness that the house was notorious for filled my nostrils, but nothing else. I'm not sure what I was expecting, really. Like I said, the stain was old. It was probably nothing. With an aggravated huff, I shoved the dresser back in place and got on with my day. Later that day, I was in the living room with Lena, who was unusually quiet. My mum was complaining to my dad that we were out of groceries again and that she was going to run to the store. She asked Lena if she wanted to join her, and to both me and my mum's surprise, Lena said no. Once my mum had gone, I asked my little sister what was up. You always go with Mum. Is everything okay? She shrugged, but didn't answer. Hey, Lena, I pressed. What's up? You can talk to me. She slowly looked at me and said, This house is scary. Frowning, I asked her to elaborate. For a time, she considered how to explain. Finally, she said, It feels like we aren't the only ones living here. I explained to her that this wasn't true, and that we just weren't used to living in such a large and old home. She didn't seem all that convinced, and why should she have? The place was damned creepy. The incessant creaking and moaning, the stink, the dogs always growling, Kai's awful imaginary friend, strange stains on the walls. Hell, even the way the neighbours always stared at us was weird. That night I awoke to one of our dogs sniffing my feet. This obnoxious new habit woke me up as often as the growling. I assumed it was to do with the smell of the place. It probably clung to my feet as I walked around during the day, and dogs are infamous for sniffing, licking, and even eating anything that smells funky. I pushed the dog back with my heel and grumbled, Stop, go. The dog, which I assume was Chiefy by the heavy footfalls, obeyed and left. I was halfway sunken back into sleep when Lena's shrill shriek sent my heart into my throat. I scrambled out of bed, terrified that my sister had badly hurt herself somehow. This wasn't a little scream. It was the type of scream that told you something was really wrong. I was the first to enter her room, though I could hear my parents bumping around down the hall. Lena, I cried, are you okay? She was sitting up on her bed, back against the wall, blankets scrunched up to her eyes. And how bright those wide, petrified eyes were, even in the dark. Lena whimpered something unintelligible, I stepped closer, noticing that she wasn't really looking at me, but beyond me, at the corner of her room. She whispered, Someone. Behind you." I could hear my parents stumbling out from their room. They weren't here yet. I was petrified, nearly unable to move. Lena kept staring past me, her tears glistening in the gloom. Slowly, I turned around. In the darkness that dominated that corner of the room, I thought I saw the figure of. I'm not sure what. To this day, I'm not sure if I really saw anything, or if I just imagined it. But I think it was a woman, or a girl, naked and blood-stained, faceless, but for the shine of two piercing irises. I screamed. Lena joined me. My father snapped the light on as he stepped into Lena's room. The darkness was gone, and with it, the figure. "What the hell happened?" he bellowed. In tandem, Lena and I pointed at the corner. My sister mumbled, There was someone in the corner," I finished for her, my arm trembling. As unsure as I am in hindsight of what I saw, in that moment I was not. I was mortified. As someone who had never believed in the supernatural, I found myself feeling differently, all at once. My father frowned at the corner, which was unoccupied. It was entirely normal, except I noticed it then. Old stains, similar to those behind my dresser, low on the wall. By then my mum had joined us, and the look she shared with my dad sent ice down my spine. Somehow, the expression on her face scared me, more than even the thing I had maybe seen in the shadows. "There's nothing," my dad announced after a moment. "Tyson, dear," my mum said. My dad held up a hand as if to say, "Don't." He turned back to my sister and I. "Girls, it's normal to get spooked in a new house like this. Happens to your mother and me too. But don't let it get to you, you hear? It's just an old house. It'll take some getting used to." He gestured at the dogs, who had hurried in at some point amid the confusion. "Even these two get spooked here and there. It's normal." We spoke a little longer, until Lena and I had calmed down a little, then decided to go back to bed. Lena asked if she could sleep in my room. I said yes, more for myself than for her. She joined me on my bed and quickly drifted off, assured by her big sister's presence. I lay there for a while, wondering how it was that Kai hadn't woken from the earlier screaming. Then just as I fell asleep, I thought I heard my brother in the other room, speaking to his imaginary friend. The next day we all carried on, as though nothing had happened the prior night, though there was a tension in the way we moved through the house and spoke to each other. Lena was the worst of us in this regard. She spoke very little, and more concerningly, did not play or sing along to her K-pop soundtrack a single time. I was in the midst of mopping the floor. The dogs had gotten it dirt-stained again, when the false normalcy of the day broke. Kai approached my mother in the kitchen as she was chopping vegetables. My dad had just returned from the store with 2 bags of groceries and was orbiting my mum as he unloaded them. Kai softly said, "Mum." "Yes, hun, what is it? Can we go back to our old house?" My dad ceased his motion, facing away, but listening keenly. I did the same, pausing with the mop pushed halfway across the landing. Mum looked worriedly at Kai. "Why do you want to go back, sweetie?" "I don't want to talk to him anymore," whispered Kai. A horror passed over my mother's features. It was the same expression that had shaken me the night before. My father placed his hands on the countertop, bowing his head and letting out a long, grisly sigh. "Shit," he muttered. "Tyson," my mum murmured. "We ought to discuss this with Ari at least. She's old enough. She ought to have a say." I dropped the mop with a clatter and rushed into the kitchen. "Have a say about what?" I demanded. "Damn it," my dad said. "Kai, buddy, go watch a show with Lena, will you?" "But," Kai started. "I'll answer your question soon, bud. I promise. For now, go join Lena." Somberly, my little brother obeyed. A moment later, the raucous sound of SpongeBob SquarePants carried down the hall. I looked at my parents and crossed my arms. "Ari, love," my dad started, "we weren't totally honest with you when we first moved in." I frowned, waiting. My mum said, "The smell isn't the only reason why we were able to afford this house." She spoke as if the words hurt to say. What other reason? I asked impatiently. Dad sighed again. Something happened to the family who used to live here. Something awful. That image of the blood-stained girl in the corner flashed through my mind. I hugged myself, feeling the sting of tears at the back of my eyes. I'll be blunt, my father continued, because there's no better way of saying this. The family who last lived here, they died, they were killed, right here in this house. I lifted a hand to my mouth. The tears were here now, their warmth running down my cheeks. Tyson, tell her the whole thing, Mum insisted. Damn it, fine. My dad looked me square in the eyes. The father of that family, he was the one who killed him, after which he killed himself. I sank into one of the dining chairs, shaking. I thought of the brown stains on the walls, how they looked like they had once been crimson. And you bought this house anyway, I cried. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, dear, my mother said. Then she added, though perhaps it was a mistake. No, rebuked my father. There's nothing wrong with this house. It's a little creepy, a little creaky, but that's it. Living here is still a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And that was the end of it, for the moment at least. My dad refused to entertain the notion that our wonderful new home was haunted. And honestly, I wasn't quite there yet myself. Again, I'd never believed in that sort of thing. And the girl I thought I saw, I could have imagined it. My sister had told me there was someone there. When you look into the dark, often you'll see just what you're expecting. Or worse, what you're fearing. That doesn't make it real. So we carried on. Kai was told to ignore his imaginary friend. Lena needed a few days, but eventually she got back to her K-pop demon hunters obsession. The dogs even settled down somewhat. Nothing else would happen for a while that suggested our house was haunted, and I tried my damnedest not to dwell on the fact that a family had been butchered within my home's walls. At least I finally understood why the neighbours gawked at us so much. What sort of family would want to live there? They were surely thinking. The peace we maintained for a while was broken by my brother's crying one day. Despite Kai's age, he was not one to cry easily. So when I heard him weeping, I set my textbook and notes aside and went to check on him. I knocked gently and opened his door. He was sitting on the floor in the middle of his room with his legs crossed, crying into his palms. "Hey, Kai," I said, approaching him and kneeling. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Kai's lower lip quivered as he spoke. "He came back." My stomach sank. "Who came back?" "My friend," he started but hesitated. "The scary man." "I thought he was your friend," I asked, as confused as I was frightened. No, Kai whimpered. "He's bad." I looked warily around the room. Swallowing, I asked my brother, "Where did you see this man?" Hand shaking, Kai pointed at our shared wall. I shivered as I looked at it. It was much like my side. There was a small desk pushed up against a surface of wooden planks painted ivory white. A couple paintings hung on it, and an air vent was built into its base. There was no brown staining that I could see here, though, mercifully. I sighed as I hugged my little brother. "It'll be okay," I fumbled. Unsurprisingly, Kai did not seem assured. I tried again. "Hey, do you want to sleep with me tonight?" His eyes lit up. "Really?" "Yes, really," I answered with a smile. I hadn't invited him into my room much in the past couple years. Seeing how much it meant to him warmed me and made me feel a little bad. That night he pranced into my room, pillow clutched in his arms. "Close the door," I told him with a smirk, "or Chiefy is going to be licking our feet tonight." We got cozy in bed, and I read him a bit of a book he loved about a boy and a dragon. Once we were done with that, I asked him if he wanted to tell me anything about his former friend, the so-called scary man. He pouted and shook his head. Fair enough, I thought, regretting that I'd even asked. I shifted the subject to one of his favourite shows, earning back his precious smile. We spoke for a while about similar things that brought him comfort, and eventually he dozed off. After tucking him in, I got back to studying for another hour, and then turned off the bedside lamp and went to sleep. It was a few hours into the night when one of the dogs started sniffing my foot. I was mildly aware of this in a state of half-sleep and tried to ignore it. Then the hound started licking, making it impossible to shrug off. "Stop," I moaned. nearly letting out an involuntary giggle at the tickle of the tongue on the sole of my foot. "Cut it out! Go!" The dog listened, panting for a moment longer, then stepping away. I was starting to drift back asleep when I remembered that I had asked Kai to close the door earlier, specifically so that the dogs wouldn't get in. Abruptly, I sat up. My heart quickened as I turned to look at the door. It was closed. I swung off the bed, taking care not to wake Kai, and whispered, "Chiefy? Miss Bear? Are you in here?" There was no response. There was no dog. I stood in the middle of my room, heart hammering, unsure what to do or think. I lifted my foot and felt it. It was damp. But then I was sweating. Surely that's all it was. A little sweat on my foot. The sniffing and licking was a weird dream, that's all. I'm too old to be getting spooked like this, I told myself. Frustrated, I got back into bed with a huff and tried to get back to sleep. It took some time, and as I lay there, I thought I saw a figure standing in the shadows past the foot of my bed. A blood-stained girl, perhaps? "I'm too old for this," I repeated, exhausted and frustrated. "Stop imagining things, Ari." I turned away and closed my eyes. The following days were normal, thankfully. Kai went back to sleeping in his room and didn't have any more visits from the scary man. I didn't have any more creepy foot dreams. And as for the apparitions I continued to see in the shadows of the house, well, once I smartened up and saw them for what they were, figments of my childish imagination, they bothered me less. Life carried on. A few normal days turned to weeks. In the surety of that routine, I couldn't have known that the worst of my family's ordeal was yet to come. I couldn't have fathomed just how dark this home's secrets truly were. The turning point arrived during one of my daily walks. Chiefy and Miss Bear were pulling on their leashes like usual, propelling me down the street, when I caught one of the neighbours staring at me. He was out by his mailbox, closer than I'd ever caught any of them. They usually stared from their windows and porches. The calm weeks had made me confident in my family's choice to purchase the house, and so I let my anger get the better of me as I glared back at this man. "Excuse me, sir?" I called. He glanced at me the way a child would look at a ghost. "Yes, you and others in your home are always staring at us. It's rude and exhausting. What is your deal?" He fidgeted with the letters he'd drawn from the mailbox. Well," he mumbled. Then after a moment, he looked up, seeming to gather his resolve. "Call it rude, but we can't help but wonder what sort of folks would want to buy a house like that." The dogs were restless. "Sit," I commanded. "Sit and stay." As I met the man's gaze again, I said, "What sort of folks, you ask? The sort who aren't taken by superstition." I smiled inwardly, pleased with my delivery. The man made a face halfway between a frown and a grimace. "Superstition," he managed. "You do know what happened in that house, right?" I tilted my chin up and answered without hesitation. The father killed his family and then himself. Horrible, no doubt about it. But not any reason to pass up on a once-in-a-lifetime deal. Unless you're superstitious, that is. "The father?" whispered the man. His eyes widened, and he looked over my shoulder at the house. "What?" I demanded. "You don't know," he said under his breath, his worried gaze falling back onto me. "I don't know what?" Chiefy pushed his head into my leg. "Miss Bear whined a little," the man explained. "There was a lot of confusion when that horrible thing happened to the family who lived there. The official reports claimed the whole family had died because that was the convenient conclusion for the investigators. But that was only a rotten bit of negligence and cowardice." He swallowed. "The truth is that the wife and the 2 children were butchered, and the father was never found." Thoughts laced in fear raced through my mind. My dogs continued to whine. "Bastard got away," continued the man. "No one knows where he went. All of us around here upped our security after. You can bet on that. Reinforced windows and doors, alarm systems, cameras, the whole suite. And then comes along a seemingly nice little family, eager to move into that godforsaken place. Imagine our shock." He shook his head. "Call it rude, miss, but you can't quite blame us for gawking, can you?" I licked my lips, which stung with dryness. Where did he go?" The man shrugged. "Like I said, no one knows. Then he looked around as though he were expecting an ambush. Leaning closer, he whispered, "Sometimes, though, our cameras catch footage of what looks like a ragged man ambling around the shrouded dark of the neighbourhood." "You've shown this to the police?" I asked. "Of course. We've done all we can to get that investigation reopened. It was a terrible thing those investigators did, but all our efforts fell on deaf ears." I glanced over my shoulder at the house. My parents had gone out for groceries again. Kai and Lena were home alone. "I have to go," I cried, and started running back home. Was the man lying? Were my parents the ones lying? I tried to make sense of it as I ran back, and slowly, in the depths of my intuition, a suspicion began to form. I burst through the front door, calling out for my siblings. They appeared a moment later, confused and a little scared. "Stay with me," I told them. "Stay close." I led them up to Kai's room and asked him to show me where the scary man had been. As he lifted his arm to point, nausea swept over me. He wasn't pointing at the wall. He was pointing at the vent. I should have called the police right then and taken my siblings over to the neighbour's place, but a delirious need to know took hold of me without me having much say in it. I lurched toward the vent and grabbed it by the sides. I pushed and pulled. It didn't budge. I pushed harder. Suddenly a groan passed through the wall, and the vent gave way. No, not only the vent. A square section of the wall went inward, about 3 feet wide and tall, with the vent at its base. Cobwebs and dust puffed out. What I'd thought was a solid wall separating my room and my brother's turned out to be a gap wide enough for someone to squeeze through. A sour reek wafted from the place. "Stay here," I told my siblings, and in my delirium, I crawled through the opening. Lena and Kai protested, but I waved them off. I shimmied along the space until I was behind the vent, leading into my own room. I pushed hard, and as I expected, the wall gave way. Another crudely cut square opened to my room. Peering out from there, the first thing I saw was the foot of my bed, and I imagined my feet poking out from the edge as I slept. A sighing sound carried from the far end of the crawl space. I froze in place, listening. The sighing was mixed with a sort of humming. "Hee," it went. "Hee hee hee hee." It grew louder, a slow rolling noise. Feeling as though my heart would burst from my chest, I slowly twisted my head. It was awfully dark at the far end of the gap. I squinted into the shadows until I could make out a solid vertical line in the dark. The end of the wall, a corner where the crawl space turned and continued out of view. The sound became more excited. "Ho, ho, 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 ho." I leaned forward, just a bit, narrowing my eyes, trying to make sense of what I saw. Half a face peeking out from the corner. One bloodshot eye, pallid, withered skin. A twisting, unnatural grin of rotten teeth. A scraggly, bony hand clutching the wall. The creature that might have been a man started to laugh again. "Hoo hoo hoo hoo!" I screeched as I threw myself back into Kai's room. It was such a scream that my throat would hurt for days to come. I grabbed my siblings' hands and ran downstairs. The ugly walls and furnishings of the house passing by me in a blur. That horrible laughing chased us all the way, and I swear I heard scurrying footsteps in our wake. We burst outside and ran straight to the neighbours. No creature followed us there that I could see. With the neighbour's phone, I called the police, and then my parents. Within 20 minutes, our lane was crammed with emergency vehicles, dozens of lights flashing in the late afternoon dim. "We didn't know, Ari, I swear," insisted my father. "The realtor told us they all died." My family and I were standing huddled by our car, waiting anxiously as the authorities searched our house. "Well, they didn't," I snapped back. "I saw him." My mother covered her face with her hands. My father shook his head, cursing to himself. Sometime later, one of the policemen approached us wearing a grim expression. "Whoever your daughter saw," he said to my parents, "is gone. The house is empty." That said, "Your daughter definitely did see someone," my mum wailed. My dad just stared. "Follow me," the policeman said. "You'll want to see this." Mum stayed with the kids while my dad and I went back into the house. The cop led us into an opening on the main floor, much like the ones I'd discovered upstairs. The passages on the ground floor were wider, danker, Moist dirt, at least I hope it was dirt, squelched underfoot, and I finally understood why our floors were always so muddy. The spaces between the walls eventually led to a cave of sorts, dug out of the earth below the house. There were used up cans of soup, beans and soda, and rotting bits of meat and fruit laying all about the place. With that, I finally understood why our groceries were so quick to run out. And the sour reek, it reached its pinnacle here in this atrocity of a den hidden beneath my house. The father who had slain his family had not died. He had lived on, here in this cave, leeching off of and tormenting my family. I thought about everything my family and I had experienced leading up to that moment and shuddered, nearly vomiting right there. We moved out immediately, not only to a new house, but to a new city. We have reinforced windows and doors in our new place, and we watch any who pass by our house the same way our former neighbours used to look at us. But it's not enough, because the man who had haunted us was never found. He is still on the loose today. The 5 of us live as though we're waiting for that thing to reappear. We try to lead a normal life, but Kai continues to imagine the return of his imaginary friend. My mother checks our pantry and fridge daily, often freaking out, thinking we're running out of food faster than we should. My dad loses it any time he spots even a bit of dirt on the floor. And I wake up in the middle of the night, at least 3 times a week, with the awful sense that something has been licking my feet. Well, there you have it. 4 absolutely terrifying stories that will have you checking your GPS, your back seat, and every corner of your house tonight. If you enjoyed these spine-chilling tales, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which story disturbed you the most. Stay safe out there, everyone. And remember, sometimes the scariest things are closer than you think.